Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate your holding the hearing, your typical courtesy with respect to Oregonians. We have two witnesses here. I guess they're the Steves, the Steve Ellis and Steve Swanson. And Mr. Swanson, his mill burned down. He is rebuilding. It seems to me it's almost a microcosm of the challenge, rebuilding a mill, providing good-paying jobs in rural areas in a tough global economy. And so we're really glad to have both of the Steves, and Steve Swanson, I think, personifies part of the picture that we're going to hear more about in the days ahead about how tough it is to compete in this tough global economy. Two quick comments with respect to issues that Chairman Barrasso, touched on. First, we authored the safety net program in this room. This room saw us see that enacted in 2000. And my own view is, and we've asked in the past the agencies to give us numbers to this effect, that the challenge in the days ahead is going to require both of these programs. There is no conceivable strategy, and the chief is here and he's nodding. Let the record show that the chief started to nod. There is no conceivable strategy where you get the harvest up so high that there's no need for a safety net. And so my hope is that we can increase the harvest in a sustainable, manner, and also continue a program that began in this room in a bipartisan way, and that's the safety net program. And I just look at the numbers, and I don't see how we're going to be able to meet the needs of rural communities without both. That's point number one. And point number two, picking up on something you and I have talked about, Mr. Chairman, increasing the harvest in a sustainable way is a hugely important forest health issue. And gosh, do we need this right now, because we are looking at the prospect all over this country of a devastating fire season. It's incredibly dry. It gets hot. You have a lightning strike in our part of the world, and all of a sudden you have an inferno on your hands. And it's produced a lot of other things, like fire borrowing, which Senator Crapo and I, with 250 organizations, are trying to stop. So I'm very much looking forward to this kind of discussion, both as it relates to increasing harvest, while we also have the safety net and the forest health issue. A few comments with respect to the O&C land, which of course is overseen by the Bureau of Land Management. My constituents want a balanced solution, and they think it is urgent. As of today, there is only one bill out there, one bill on this subject, and that is the bill that we're going to be discussing today. The bill applies updated forest management practices to about 2.8 million acres of truly unique O&C lands in my state. They have a storied history going back to the turn of the last century, with a highlight being the 1937 O&C Act, which put together what we consider to be sort of a checkerboard of public lands mixed in with private lands across 18 Oregon counties. The lands are now managed under the 1994 Northwest Forest Plan. Obviously, the landscape has changed plenty in the last 20 years. But over the last 20 years, we still have some of the same, concerns. We're still concerned about the harvest. We're still concerned about watershed health, wildlife habitat, wildfire prevention. And our mills and the counties that host the O&C lands are waiting for federal land-based logs and the revenue they generate. So this legislation we're going to discuss today, in my view, is going to jumpstart local economies, create certainty for mill owners and rural communities, and lock in protections for some of Oregon's most treasured protections that almost every resident I see would like to protect. The legislation was originally introduced in 2013 after working with people from the timber industry, environmental leaders, scientists, and others. So it is, at least in my view, a place to begin to try to find common ground, identify the problems, and find balanced solutions. The bill protects 1.6 million acres as conservation emphasis areas, and that safeguards old-growth trees and riparian protections. At the same time, it designates about 1.2 million acres as forestry emphasis areas, which will lead to a sustainable harvest of approximately 400 million board feet of timber a year for 50 years. And we have worked with the Forest Service and the BLM on it, so we'd like them to testify on that point today. Over the past 2 years, you get a lot of feedback when you're dealing with an issue like this. There are folks on the environmental side who say it cuts too much. There are people in the logging industry who say it doesn't cut enough. My own view of tough natural resources issues, and the chairman knows we've dealt with a lot of them in this room, in a tough, contentious debate about natural resources, nobody gets what they want. Nobody gets what they believe they ought to have. The question is, can they get enough to essentially meet their needs? And that's what we have sought to do in this legislation that we're considering today. Unlike other forestry proposals, my approach would not only double the harvest compared to the average harvest over the last decade, it protects lands for conservation and bedrock environmental laws such as the Endangered Species Act. The best forestry scientists in the Northwest, Jerry Franklin and Norm Johnson, who know the woods about as well as anybody on the planet, have given us invaluable counsel on it. We understand that it is not going to be unanimous when you take a vote on something like this. So we are continuing to have discussions with all concerned forest products officials, conservation groups, local governmental leaders, and recreational interests. Ideological extremes are not going to get the rural West and rural Oregon to a solution. Without compromise, our forests are going to continue to remain locked up due to lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. Management will be stalled. The health of forests will continue to diminish. So my take on the bill we're going to discuss today, it's a true compromise, a compromise that can save jobs and create more, a compromise that gets you a reliable harvest, a compromise that gets you 87,000 acres of wilderness, and provides the first ever legislative protections for old growth, O&C old growth, and O&C streams. It also provides an opportunity to manage the forests sustainably and responsibly so we can enjoy them for generations. As the chairman correctly said, my state and the rural West is not going to go back to the days of billion board foot clear cuts. The country doesn't want that. Rural communities don't want it. It's time to take the management of forests out of the courtroom and put it back into the hands of forestry and conservation professionals who are going to rely on the best available science. We want a bipartisan approach. We want a collaborative approach. The legislation we'll discuss today starts us down the path. And Mr. Chairman, if I can just begin the apology-orama, the key plane to get to Oregon, where I have to be in the rural part of the state to discuss what we're going to do about fire borrowing and the issues we're going to be talking about today, leaves not too long from the time our friends have finished testifying. So I want to apologize in advance about the bad manners. Westerners always know more about plane schedules, and I'm looking at Senator Heinrich and my colleague from Montana, Wyoming. We know more about plane schedules than anybody around, simply because of the challenge of getting home, for example, with rural town meetings in Lakeview and places like that, Steve. So I want to apologize to our guests for bad manners, and we're going to work very closely with you. The chairman wants to work on this issue intensively, and I think that's very constructive, and I look forward to doing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, and again, with apologies to guests, because after this quick comment, I'm going to make the sprint to the plane. Ms. Swanson, I very much appreciate the kind of constructive tone that you've offered today and your desire to get a compromise. Part of the approach on the harvest, I want to make clear, because, as you know, there have been strong differences of opinion with respect to the industry and the environmental community with respect to how much was devoted to harvest, how much was devoted for environmental protection, and these kinds of issues. That's why the number that I've used is the number that was furnished by the government agencies, the people that we pay to give us an objective calculation. And what the agencies said is that this would double the harvest on a sustainable basis, on average, for the next 50 years. Now, I know there continues to be disagreement on that between industry people and environmental people and like. I just want the record to show that I understand that difference of opinion, and I'm very anxious to continue to work with industry people and environmental people. The reason I looked to the agencies is I thought at least that was a starting off point, because those are people that we pay, the people in this room and taxpayers all across the country, to give us an objective analysis. So big thanks, and as you can tell, I have enormous admiration for the fact that after a fire, you said, I'm still going to be part of rural Oregon. I'm going to come right back and build a larger mill, and we want to see that prosper, and we want to see those communities prosper, and that's where I'm off to go to, be in Lakeview here not too long. So look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your letting me do this as well. I know you have a tight schedule as well.